You know, any company with big ambitions needs fuel to grow, and that fuel is capital. We've all heard about companies selling shares to raise money, right? But what happens when that's just not enough for their really grand plans? Well, today we're diving into the other side of corporate finance. Let's get into it.
So a company raises cash by issuing shares, which is basically selling off tiny pieces of ownership. But a lot of the time, that's just not going to cut it for the really big stuff. We're talking about massive expansion projects or developing some kind of groundbreaking new tech. They need a much bigger, more long-term source of funds.
And this leads us to a really critical question. The company has already sold off bits of itself, but it's still hungry for more capital. So, what's the next play? How do they get that serious long-term funding?
Well, the answer is something called a debenture. The easiest way to think about it is like a formal corporate IOU. It's how huge companies borrow massive sums of money for long periods of time. But, and this is key, they're not selling ownership anymore. They're taking on debt. This is the other side of the corporate finance coin.
You know what? The name itself kind of gives the whole game away. It comes from this old Latin word debere, which literally just means to borrow. And that is exactly what a debenture is. It's a formal, written-down promise where a company says, yep, we owe you this much money and we promise to pay it back.
So you got to understand, a debenture isn't just some casual handshake deal. Oh no, it's a formal contract. It clearly acknowledges the debt, it sets a very specific date for when the original amount, the principal, will be repaid. It promises a fixed rate of interest along the way, and it's all made official with the company's seal. It is a rock-solid agreement.
Okay, so to really, truly get what a debenture is, we have to talk about what it's not. And it is definitely not a share. This brings us to what is probably the single most important idea in this entire explainer, the difference between being an owner and being a lender.
All right, let's just boil it all down to this one simple line. If you buy a share, you are an owner of the company. Simple as that. But if you buy a debenture, you are a lender to the company. That one little distinction, it changes everything about your relationship with that business.
So let's break down these differences right here. A share is what we call owned capital, but a debenture? That's borrowed capital. As a shareholder, your return is a dividend, which can go up or down depending on profits. But as a debenture holder, you get a fixed interest payment, even if the company doesn't make a single rupee of profit. And security? Debentures are usually backed by the company's assets, which gives lenders way more protection than shareholders who have none. And finally, the big one. Owners get to vote, lenders don't. Okay, now that we've got the basics down, things get even more interesting. You see, companies don't just have one-size-fits-all loans. They actually tailor these debentures to fit their specific needs, and that's where all the strategy comes in. We can basically slice and dice them in three main ways: by how secure they are, by how long they last, that's tenure, and by whether or not they can be converted into something else. Let's quickly break down what each of those means. First up, security. A secured debenture is backed by the company's assets. Think of it like collateral. If the company can't pay you back, you have a claim on their stuff. It's a huge safety net for the investor. Then you have unsecured debentures, which don't have that backing. They are, for sure, a lot riskier for the person lending the money. Next, tenure. That's just a fancy word for how long the loan is for. Most debentures are redeemable, meaning the company pays you back after a set amount of time, say 10 years. But then you have these really rare things called irredeemable or perpetual debentures. With those, you only get your original investment back if the company actually goes out of business.
And finally, we have convertibility. A non-convertible debenture is just a straight-up loan. Pretty simple. But a convertible debenture, this is where things get really clever. This gives the lender the option to swap their loan for company shares at some point in the future. Why would a company do this? Well, they can attract investors with a lower interest rate. For the investor, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You get the safety of a loan up front with the potential to get in on the action as an owner later. You start as a lender, and you can become an owner.
All right, so we've covered the what and the why of debentures. Now let's talk about the how much. How does a company actually price these things when they first sell them? Because it's not always as straightforward as you might think. So, every debenture has what's called a face value. Let's just say it's 100 rupees. That's the amount the company promises to pay you back when the loan is due. But the price you pay for it at the start, the issue price, can actually be different.
First up, the easy one, issuing at par. This just means the price you pay is exactly the same as the face value. You pay 100 rupees for a 100 rupee debenture. Simple.
Then you've got issuing at a premium. This is where you actually pay more than the face value. Now you might be thinking, why on earth would I do that? Well, maybe the interest rate it pays is fantastic, or the company is so solid and so well respected that investors are literally lining up to lend them money. So you might pay 110 today for a 100 rupee debenture because you know those high interest payments will make it all worth it.
And on the flip side, a company can issue at a discount. This is where you pay less than the face value, like paying 95 rupees for a 100 rupee debenture. A company might do this to sweeten the deal and make its debt more attractive, especially if the interest rate they're offering isn't super high. For you, the investor, it's like getting a little bonus just for signing up.
So let's bring it all home. What have we learned? Debentures are an absolutely crucial tool for companies looking for long-term debt. Remember, they represent a loan, not ownership, which makes you a lender, not an owner. That means you get fixed interest, not a slice of the profits. And really, getting your head around this is fundamental to understanding how a company truly fuels its growth.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question to chew on. When you see a company taking on a whole lot of debt by issuing debentures, is that a sign of bold, ambitious growth? Or is it a warning signal of potential risk down the road? The answer, well, it's not always so clear. And that's what makes this whole world of corporate finance so fascinating. Thanks for tuning in.